Yep, we are.
Okay. Hi, so this is our Issues in Affordable Housing final project. My name's Dinsmore.
And I'm Caroline Kwon.
And for this project, we chose the city of San Francisco, partially because we're in the Bay Area, so we just are knowledgeable about it, and also because there's such a need for affordable housing in the Bay Area, which is a lot of what we talked about in this DeCal. So some quick stats. San Francisco is the second most densely populated city. There's 780,000 approximately families or living in households. 780,000. I'm going to just cut and I'll cut it in. Okay, so there's 780,000 approximately households in San Francisco. And then there's just not the rate of how new units being built does not match the population growth, and particularly the job growth. So you have people pouring in, you have population growth as always, and just not enough housing units for it, so which leads to typically low-income people being displaced, seniors being displaced, people with disabilities being displaced, and that's what we're trying to address with our project. So homelessness is really high in San Francisco. Highest number of homeless inhabitants per capita of any U.S. city. Approximately 1 in 5 individuals experiencing homelessness in SF are under 25. And then you have a lot of kids are homeless, and a lot of families are homeless, and a lot of seniors are homeless. So that's all listed on the slides, the stats for that. And so studies show that San Francisco needs around 8,000 new units between 2015 and 2023 to meet the housing demand, and that's just not happening right now. And then it's on the slide, it's divided into like very low income, low, moderate, and above moderate, and which numbers for each of those. And then some other quick things about affordable housing in the Bay Area. The average or the marker for low income for a family of 4 in the Bay Area is 117,000, which is nearly twice the median household for an American family. And it takes like approximately 20 years for a median income family in the Bay Area to put down a 20% deposit on a house, $1 million house, which is actually a fairly standard price for a house in the Bay Area. So that gives you an idea of how difficult it is for people to buy houses and or rent, and then renting is a whole another animal. And then you just have the ratio of new jobs in the Bay Area. So you have Silicon Valley, San Francisco, a lot of tech industry happening, is 3.5 to 1 of jobs to homes. So people are pouring in, there's just not enough space. And then just people moving out because they can't afford to live there, and that's what it really hits the low-income individuals, because they just can't afford to live there because there's people with higher incomes displacing them.
Okay, and then so for the type of units that we will be proposing in this project, if you look at the graphic on the left, the way we live city by city, it shows the percentage of occupied housing units by city. And if you see San Francisco, about 25% of buildings are 20 plus unit apartments. And then if you look at the graphic on the right, the majority of housing units are also single family units. So the proposed development that we will be covering is a 20 plus unit apartment with single family units. And then if you look at the next slide, so generally in San Francisco there is a height limit of about 40 feet, but there are exemptions for affordable housing, which may allow up to 70 feet actually. So if you look at the San Francisco 100% affordable housing bonus program, then an additional 3 stories or about 30 feet could be allowed for 100% of affordable housing developments. So we're proposing a building of about 65 feet, and then we'll have approximately 100 total studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom units with a maximum of about 5 residents per unit to allow for single families. And then on the next slide, so for our amenities, first we plan to include utilities, including laundry facilities and kitchens. And then second, one of our focuses is community building, because we hope to promote the building as a community rather than a property, to advance the overall quality of life and to establish interpersonal connections. So we're going to do this through community spaces like a recreational area and an open park or green space. And then our next focus is on children and teen programs to provide services to aid students, because many minors with a history of insecure housing face non-traditional or interrupted education. So programs such as a library, tutoring services, homework clubs, and after-school and summer programs will provide more guidance and school assistance, as well as extracurricular activities. Then we're also going to provide adult programs like ESOL and job searching workshops and on-site childcare, because homelessness disproportionately affects communities of color and immigrant families. So we hope that the provision of ESOL and these other workshops will assist residents in finding job security without worrying about childcare. And then finally, due to the large elderly homeless population we talked about earlier, we'll also provide senior programs like mental health training classes and health programs that we hope will support their independence and quality of life, especially because, as studies have shown, home insecurity accelerates and exacerbates the process of aging. And then next slide.
So another thing that we want to focus on with our apartment building is sustainability, because it's important that it's affordable, but it's also important that it's good for the environment. So the main things we're focusing on is conserving water and conserving power. So a couple examples of this are motion sensing lighting, which is that when someone walks into the room, the lights either turn on or dim, and then when someone leaves, or if there hasn't been motion in the room for a certain amount of time, the lights go off. That way lights aren't just being left on for long periods of time, and you're conserving energy. And then like rain catching systems to make sure that the sewer systems don't get overflowed, and then also rain catching for water reusing, which then can be used for making sure that the green spaces like the park or whatever other community spaces have green grass. Oh, that just was bad. Have plants and vegetation. And then solar panels, which would be on the roof, which are relatively inexpensive to install, particularly if you install them like during construction. It's just like a part of it, as opposed to adding them in later. And then they pay themselves off very quickly as well. So it's a common misconception that solar panels are actually expensive and not for affordable housing, but it can be used in affordable housing units and still be inexpensive. And then in terms of water conserving, we would use a septic tank system, as well as a gray water system, which utilizes a septic tank, where basically gray water from like showers, dishwasher, whatever, laundry, etc., goes in through a septic tank where it's filtered. It goes through a sand filter, a pump it. It's all in the thing you're looking at right now on the slides. And then that water is then deemed like usable to be for like plants, a park, grass, etc. So again, promoting green spaces.
And then for our funding, so the majority of our funding will come from external sources to maintain affordability, but residents will still need to pay some rent. But affordable rent depends on the individual resident or household income, as you can see on the table on the left, because it can't surpass 30% of anyone's income. So it's very variable, and it's really hard to predict what we'll have as our for like the rent of an entire building. But we do know that the rent will be much lower than the fair market rent, which you can see on the table on the right, which gives us a bit more of a framework. And then on the next slide, aside from rent, we plan to receive funding from 4 main areas. So the first one, the San Francisco Housing Bond dollars from Proposition A, which was passed in 2015. This provides $310 million for affordable housing development from bonds, and an additional future bond program providing $500 million will be voted on in the next election. And then our second source, the Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, allocates tax incentives that provide moderate affordability through rent restrictions on their own, but in combination with other sources of funding, such as the other ones we'll talk about in this slide, it'll achieve even greater affordability. And then third, the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program is one of the largest sources of affordable housing funding, and it supports development that reduces greenhouse gas emissions by providing subsidies. And we know we can qualify for this because we're constructing new affordable housing, and in the previous slides we'll be focusing on sustainability, and we can expect funding from this program. And then finally, we also plan to secure local funds. For example, like Mitch Crispell from Bridge Housing explained how they had secured funding for the 490 South Van Ness project through the Jobs Housing Linkage Funds and Inclusionary in Lieu fees, respectively. And then additional funding from private sources will also be needed.
So our first potential regulatory obstacle is just that there's a lot of zoning laws and limits against high density apartment buildings. So that usually is in the form of like a height limit, so either a number of floors or a number of feet, because they don't want, like, for example, shadows cast over parks or public spaces. And then there's, especially in San Francisco, there's earthquake issues, and there's a whole lot of different things that tie into that, but there's usually a limit. Examples include 40 feet with, and then sometimes there's additional length exclusions, so it could be like 50 feet. And then diagonal restrictions and regulations depending on the district. So but what it eventually ends up meaning is that it's very hard to build like tall units and in dense cities, because they are trying to keep it less dense, I guess you could say. And then there's also location limits, so it depends on where you are in the city. Sometimes there'll be exclusions made for high transit areas if they want to like incentivize people to use public transit, but that's typically an extensive process, and so that's what we see as being one regulatory obstacle.
And then another regulatory obstacle is the various fees and permits we'll need for the approval process. So the Department of Building Inspection issues all permits, but this department also has several sub-departments, so it's a very complicated process that doesn't allow for a lot of smooth transitions. For instance, the Central Permit Bureau issues the permits for construction, electrical, plumbing, and street space. And then other bureaucratic roadblocks include the contractors' agreements and development impact fees. So in total, all of these fees add up to $23,455 for the development of a single-family residence and $19,558 for a multifamily residence. And this is all, these are both close to 3 times the national averages. So again, it's very hard to build new housing in San Francisco because of the high costs. And then in 2016, these additional fees resulted in a total cost of development of about $425,000 per unit. So as a result, there is a very slow approval process that can take up to several years and very high costs for development. And then these are our sources.